Marcus slams the door, shouting, "You sold my condo. Hand over the money, now." Bria clutches her chest, tears welling, but Ellie Hart, 65, once invisible, just breathes in and says, calm as steel, "There's one more thing you need to hear." Silence. 7 years of being treated like a shadow end here. Ellie already sold the condo, moved out, and kept the only thing that matters, the right to her own life. But that one more thing? It isn't mercy, it's proof. Recordings, dates, signatures, their own words turning on them. Tonight, the inheritance fantasy dies, and a mother they underestimated walks out with her dignity and a plan that flips their world upside down. Want to hear the tape? Marcus hit the door so hard the frame rattled, then shouldered through it like a man walking into a fire he'd set himself. "You sold my condo? Hand over the money, now." His voice cracked on the last word, the way rage sometimes does when it runs out of air. Bria floated in behind him, one hand to her chest, mascara threatening to run. She said my name, Ellie, in that soft, pleading tone she used when she needed something. I didn't move. I'd been waiting for this scene, the one where everyone says the quiet part out loud. I took a breath that tasted of dust and pine sol and said, as evenly as I could, "There's one more thing you need to hear." The room stilled. Even the street noise, sirens 3 blocks over, a bus sighing at the curb, seemed to press its ear against the glass. It's strange what you notice when a life is breaking open. The dent in the old sofa cushion where my husband Rob used to sit, a pale square on the wall where a picture had hung for 30 years. The water stain up near the ceiling that looked like a continent we never visited. I'd lived in this 2-bedroom unit long enough to know every flaw by heart. It smelled like coffee and old paper and winter coats. It had been a shelter, then a memory palace, then a waiting room. For years, I waited for a knock that meant love and not obligation. For years, I made my son's favorite smothered pork chops and watched him scroll his phone between bites. For years, I measured my value by how quickly I could say yes. When Rob died 7 years ago, he went like a gentleman slipping out of a crowded party, quietly, without making a scene. The bed dipped, then it didn't. The world made a sound only I could hear, like glass cooling. I learned the hum of loneliness, the way it sits on the chest and never announces itself as grief, only as a weight you adjust to like a heavy purse. I told myself Marcus would come around. People say that, he'll come around. They rarely add the timeline or the route. He had Bria. He had promotions and fantasy football and the kind of friends who called him man, and slapped his shoulder in photographs. Every 2 weeks he'd give me a quick call, the kind where you can hear him looking for the exit. Holidays, sure. A hug at Christmas that smelled like someone else's life. Bria was sunshine the first few months, the way people are when they're still trying on the costume of goodness. I'll admit I liked the attention. "Mama Ellie," she'd chirp, supermarket flowers in hand, scanning the room the way buyers do. Square footage, storage potential, the age of the appliances. I missed it at first, those quick, assessing glances, but eventually I saw them for what they were. Calculations dressed as kindness. She'd nudge Marcus, tease out a laugh, and somewhere between a compliment and a sigh she'd plant a seed. "When we make this place ours," she said it like a joke, all sugar. The sugar dissolved fast. I can tell you the day the illusion died because ordinary days never carry that much weight. Tuesday. The bathroom fan made its usual tired rattle. I heard the door open and 2 voices rush in like weather. They didn't know I was home, or maybe they did and didn't care. I stood there with my hand on the medicine cabinet, listening through the thin door the way a child listens for thunder. "How much do you think it's worth?" Bria asked, voice bright with possibility. "280 easy," Marcus said, and the number hung in the air like a promise he hadn't earned. "Down payment on the house," she said, like it was already printed on a check. My son laughed the kind of laugh a stranger might use. "She won't sell now, but she won't live forever." There are sentences that take a person apart so cleanly it feels surgical. That was one. Bria's relief was a sound I won't forget. "Thank God," she said. "I don't know how long I can pretend." I learned, in that minute, what I meant to them. A bridge they didn't want to cross until it burned behind me. I didn't step out raging, didn't deliver a monologue, didn't throw plates like a woman in a movie. I covered my mouth and let the truth run through me like cold medicine. When I did walk into the room, Bria outperformed surprise, and Marcus pretended the phone in his hand could save him. I offered coffee. They refused. 10 minutes later, the door clicked shut, and I sat on the old sofa and asked a question so small it almost disappeared. When did I consent to my own erasure? People think change happens like a thunderclap. Mine came like a list. The next morning, I found an old notebook with a cracked spine and wrote down everything that hurt. Every comment, every withheld glance, every argument I lost by default because I didn't want to be difficult. 5 pages later, I had a history anyone could read. I made another list, things that were mine to decide. The list was short and lit up like a runway: my name, my time, my home. At the bank a week later, waiting for a clerk to fix a typo on my mailing address, I overheard 2 women do what we all do: balance hope against fear in public. My mother-in-law sold the house, the younger one said. Bought a condo, she's traveling with the rest. The older woman made a scandalized little noise, then a laugh. I wouldn't have the nerve. The younger one shrugged. It's her money. Why would she need permission? My heart knocked once and then again. Harder. Why would I need permission? I carried that sentence out of the bank like a receipt I didn't want to misplace. I Googled a realtor the way you Google a recipe you're almost sure you can make. The man who answered, Nathan Price, had a voice I could sit on. He asked me questions. I answered. He offered to come by the next day. That night I slept badly, not because I was afraid, but because the part of me that had been quiet for years was wide awake and bold. Nathan wore a gray suit that understood daylight. He walked the rooms the way a doctor walks a patient's chart. 280 if we shine it up, 250 if we go fast, he said, then watched my face like he was waiting for a committee to assemble behind my eyes. I thought of Marcus's laugh, Bria's relief, Rob's hand on my knee in a different decade. Let's go fast, I said. And discreet. He blinked, then smiled and slid the papers across the table as if he'd been rooting for me all along. My hand didn't shake when I signed. I expected a drum roll. I got the steady scratch of a pen, which felt better. I didn't tell Marcus. He called and called, check-ins that were really countdowns, and I gave him, I'm thinking, the way you give a child, maybe, soft and non-committal. Bria texted house listings like Valentine's. Look at the yard, she said. Think of future grandbabies. They love to put babies on the scale next to your will. Even hypotheticals have weight. I made another kind of list. What to take, what to leave. Clothes. The good pan. Rob's watch with the cracked crystal. 3 photo frames. The rest I sold for cash or gave to a church basement that could bless what I no longer needed. The movers came on a Tuesday that felt nothing like the other one. I bought a 1-bedroom with windows that took their job seriously. $175,000 bought quiet and sunlight and a kitchen that didn't apologize. The leftover money slid into an account my banker called a cushion. I've never liked that word. It sounds like napping. This felt like a parachute packed by someone competent. If you're waiting for guilt, it came, but not like a wave. More like a draft, a chill under a door you can fix with weather stripping. Every time it crept in, I walked through the new condo, touched the cool counter, opened the window, watched a dog walker pass below, and remembered that dignity doesn't arrive as an apology. It arrives as a key. A week later came the dinner invitation, a first. Marcus picked an Italian place with dim lights and brick walls and framed black and white photos of people pretending not to look at the camera. He chose a table in the corner the way people do when they want privacy, to stage manage someone else's choices. The waitress poured water. Bria called me Mama Ellie, like she was winding a music box. I listened to specials, heard none. The main courses landed, and the script began. Concern. Safety. That big condo all by yourself. Proximity to them in case you fall. Then the ask dressed up like generosity. Move in, or sell and help with the down payment. A family price, Bria said, the way some people say grace. I chewed a piece of salad until it had no flavor left and said the simplest sentence I own. I'll think about it. They blinked, recalibrated, pushed a little harder, the way salespeople do when they smell the stall. We're counting on this, Bria said, as if hope equals entitlement. Marcus called me selfish without saying the word. I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, and let the silence do some work. We paid. We hugged like we were in a photograph. Outside, the air tasted clean. Do not mistake my calm for surrender. By then, the papers were signed, the wire had cleared, boxes were stacked in my new living room, and the copy of the closing statement lived in a binder with tabs I labeled myself. On my phone were recordings I didn't want to need. Voices whispering plans around the edges of my life, dates, times, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, proving we were in the same room when they said the things people say when they believe you won't push back. Insurance, I told myself, not a weapon. I know how these stories go when they go wrong. People decide you're unwell when your decisions don't include them. They write their names in pencil on your future and tell themselves it's a legal document. Which brings us back to the door, to Marcus's fists, to Bria's hand on her heart, to the dust and the echo and the picture ghost on the wall. "You sold my condo?" he said, and there it was again, that quiet part out loud. I looked at my son and saw not a villain exactly, but a man who'd been handed a story about what mothers owe and never looked up from the page. "It was never yours," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "It was mine, and I did what I needed to do." Bria's eyes filled, but I'd learned to tell the difference between sorrow and strategy. She started talking about houses and babies and a life they could almost touch if only I would stop being a problem and start being a bank. I said there was one more thing they needed to hear. Proof, I meant. The kind that holds when feelings don't. They both went very still, the way people do when they realize the floor isn't where they thought it was. If this were a movie, maybe the camera would pull back now, take in the empty room, and the three of us arranged like a tableau, mother, son, wife, each standing on a different version of the past. But this is just a voice telling you the truth. The night the inheritance fantasy died wasn't loud. It was precise. It was a woman who'd been invisible, stepping into the light and finding it didn't burn. It was a key turning in a new lock. It was the sound of paper, signed and final, and the soft click of a door that finally belonged to me. I didn't wake up a hero. I woke up with a sore shoulder and a coffee that tasted a little burnt because I forgot to set the grinder right. The only thing different was the sound in my head, like a dial had finally clicked from wait to go. I opened the drawer with the rubber bands and stray batteries and found a notebook with a cracked blue cover. On the first line, I wrote "today," and then I wrote everything else. The sofa comment, the way Bria scanned the room like an appraiser, the Tuesday in the bathroom with their numbers and laughs, the word forever used like a crowbar against my ribs. 5 pages later, my hand ached, and my throat did too, but the ache felt useful. I could hold the proof in my palm, flip it, read it back to myself, and not flinch. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I was a woman being harvested in small, polite cuts. I changed the sheets, took out the recycling, watered the philodendron Rob had rescued from a clearance rack years ago, and then I did the riskiest thing I'd done in 7 years. I picked up the phone for myself. "Price & Co. Realty," a woman chirped, the kind of bright that usually makes me defensive. "I need someone discreet," I said, "and fast." She didn't miss a beat. "Nathan can be there at 10 tomorrow." She pronounced tomorrow like a promise. I hung up and sat very still. I could hear my heartbeat and the faint hum of the refrigerator, and somewhere, a neighbor's television laughing at a show I didn't watch. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of a decision finally standing up inside me. Nathan Price wore a gray suit and a tie the color of wet slate. He walked my rooms with a care I appreciated. No pity, no salesman patter about potential, just facts. He checked the windows, the water stains, the age of the stove. He measured with a metal tape that made a pleasant, honest sound when it snapped back. "If you stage and shine," he said, glancing at his notes, "you could flirt with 280. If you need speed, we price at 250. We whisper it to the right people, and we keep your name low." He looked up like he expected to meet a committee. He found just me. "Speed," I said, "and whisper." His pen paused, then moved. "There's a fee structure," he went on. "I'll lay it out." He did. We signed. The pen felt heavier than it looked. When he left, I followed him to the door and, out of habit, asked if he wanted coffee. He smiled kindly. "Maybe when this is done." After he was gone, I made a fresh pot anyway, and it tasted better. The grinder setting had been wrong all along. Selling a life is tedious. There are photographs and legal descriptions and a parade of strangers who want to imagine themselves sleeping where you learn to count your breaths. Nathan kept it quiet, like he said. The first couple who came through stood in the living room, hands clasped, eyes soft. They were Jason and Maya, newly married, needing to move for her job, the kind of polite that comes from not yet having had to be impolite for survival. They didn't talk about knocking down walls, they talked about light. Maya stood where I used to read and said, "I can picture mornings here," and didn't once mention my death. When their offer came, $270, cash, clean, I didn't haggle. I said yes like a prayer you can close the book on. At the bank, the teller with the mauve lipstick slid the cashier's check across the counter with two hands like it was a baby. "Congratulations," she said. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do with my face. The manager, a woman with hair like polished wood, walked me through the transfer, the deposit, the way you set up accounts so your future answers to you and not to anyone's panic. A cushion, she called it. Emergency fund. I didn't tell her the emergency had already happened and I had survived it. I signed and initialed and watched my name multiply in the right places. Paperwork isn't dramatic, but it's the closest thing most of us get to a sword. I found the new place 2 neighborhoods over. 1 bedroom, south-facing windows with the kind of confidence only a southern exposure has. A kitchen with a decent oven and a counter just wide enough for 3 bowls and a cutting board. The bathroom fan didn't rattle. The walls didn't know my life yet. The cellar was a nurse moving to nights at a different hospital. We stood in the empty room, 2 women in comfortable shoes, and talked about water pressure and mail slots and whether the UPS guy tends to ring. I wired the money. No mortgage, no note on the fridge reminding me when the payment is due. The keys were heavy and ordinary and perfect. Packing was a reckoning. Rob's jacket still smelled faintly like cedar and winter. I put my nose in a sleeve and let the ache come and go. I kept his watch with the cracked crystal, my wedding band, the bent spatula that has never failed an egg, 3 framed photos that prove I have laughed hard with my mouth open. I let the sideboard go. I let boxes of I don't know what go to the church basement where a man named Eddie said, "It'll bless somebody." I believed him. The movers showed up on a Tuesday that felt nothing like the one when I learned I wasn't a person in my own story anymore. They wrapped and lifted and carried my old life out without judgment. I walked behind them with a roll of blue tape and a Sharpie and labeled boxes like I was writing the new map. Afterward, a woman in a denim jacket cornered me near the stack of folding chairs. "I'm Bria," she said. "Not my Bria." Another one, hair clipped back, cheeks flush with the consequences of starting over. "I'm moving into a studio this week," she said. "My mother says I'm being dramatic. I think I'm being specific." I laughed in a way that recognized her. "Specific is how you stop drowning," I said. She nodded like she was memorizing that. "Start where the light falls," I added, half a joke, pointing at the postcard in her hand. She squinted at it, then smiled slow. "All right," she said. "I will." On the bus home, my phone buzzed. A photograph of a perfect lopsided breakfast sandwich, egg bleeding a little into cheese, sat in my messages like a medal pinned to a cheap jacket. "Fed," Marcus wrote. "Interview Tuesday." I sent back the gold star, then typed, "Proud of you for cleaning behind the fridge." He replied with a marble emoji and a broom. "We've learned a language that looks silly on paper and keeps us alive." 2 days later, I walked into the community center for my volunteer shift and stopped short. Bria, my Bria, sat in a folding chair in the hallway, a manila folder on her lap like a shield. She looked different. Not thinner, not glamored, just less arranged. "Mrs. Hart," she said, standing reflexively. "Eleanor," I corrected gently. We regarded one another in the fluorescent truce of institutional lighting. "Personal finance at 10, she said, tapping the closed door. "I'm early." "Me too," I said, holding up my tote like proof I had somewhere to be. We stood in a quiet that wasn't hostile or friendly, just new. "I mailed you the divorce papers," she blurted, then flushed. "I didn't mean, I only meant you might hear it from me instead of a rumor." I nodded. "I'm sorry for what didn't work," I said, "and I'm glad for what might later." She glanced down at the folder, then back up. "I kept trying to build a life out of urgency," she said. "I'm learning to use a calendar." We both smiled because survival sounds funny when it's honest. The class door opened. The instructor waved. "You coming?" Bria asked. "Different room," I said, pointing toward the paintbrush sign with an arrow. "Good," she said, surprising us both. "It suits you." In the studio, a new woman in a postal service visor held her pencil like it might explode. "I can't draw," she announced to the room. "I fail at drawing." "Good news," I said, sliding a chair beside her. "We're not here to draw. We're here to make marks and then decide which ones we like." She blinked, then tried a line. It wobbled. We both smiled like we'd just met a friend who can't park straight yet. On Wednesday, I met with the woman in the blazer to hand over her print. She chose a seat by a window and placed the wrapped frame on the table like it might swim away. "I filed the last paper," she said. Matter of fact, like a person ordering toast. I thought I'd feel like a house with no furniture. Turns out I feel like a sidewalk after rain. I could see it. The clean. The way everything ordinary shines when it's finally allowed to be ordinary. "Start where the light falls," she murmured, reading the small line on my card as if it had been there the whole time and only just now appeared. That evening, the building smelled faintly of someone's soup. I opened my door and found a padded envelope on the mat. Inside, a flyer from the library with a link to my talk and a note in tight, tidy print. I watched, it read. "I cried. I signed a lease. Thank you. Kayla." For a second, my breath misfired, the way a car does when you've flooded it. I sat at the table, the one where I had first set my phone down and told it the truth without flinching, and read the note again. Not because I needed proof, but because sometimes the echo is worth hearing. On Friday, the sky performed a full-on apology for a week of gray. I took my canvas to the park and painted without judgment, just the vague outline of buildings and the specific perfection of a pigeon with one toe missing who still strutted like a king. The woman who feeds them arrived with her brown bag and her sermons. "I told them no again," she reported cheerfully. "They survived." I saluted her with my brush. "So did you," I said. We sat until the light moved on, the way light is allowed to. The next morning, Marcus called after his interview. "I didn't lie," he said, breathless with the novelty. "I didn't make myself bigger or smaller. I told the truth, like it was a competence." I closed my eyes and pictured him at a conference table, hands open, not clenched. "That's a skill," I said, "one they don't teach in school." He laughed. "Offer came in low," he admitted. "I told them I'd think and let them know by Monday." I could hear an old version of him in the background, the one who would have agreed immediately to anything that looked like approval. "Thinking isn't promising," I said, smiling. "You taught me that," he said. Sunday night, I set up the small camera on the table again. The red light glowed like a calm heartbeat. I spoke to the lens without performing for it. "You don't have to blow up your life to claim it," I said. "Sometimes the revolution is an inch at a time. A no, a door, a chair with your name on it, a sandwich you made and ate and took a picture of, because you're the kind of person who is finally proud of feeding yourself." I ended with the line that still makes me laugh. "Keys turn both ways," I said. "No one charges extra for a second try." When I turned off the camera, the apartment held a gentle hush, the kind rooms make when they approve of what just happened in them. The street glow drew its familiar path across my rug. I stepped into it with bare feet and followed it to the chair I've come to think of as the place where my voice lives. Somewhere above me, the neighbor landed the piano piece again and added a flourish just because he could. My phone buzzed. A photo from Marcus. A job offer letter on a table. A pen. A coffee ring half overlapping the signature line like a blessing and a warning. "Thinking," he wrote. I typed, "Start where the light falls." And then set the phone down face first. The plant on the sill, the one Rob rescued off a clearance rack a lifetime ago, had sent a new vine out overnight and was reaching for a hook I hadn't realized I'd installed. I laughed. Sometimes the future makes plans with you while you sleep. I got up, took the empty $5 frame off the wall, slid out the paper with its penciled sentence, and set the messy middle print inside, this time for me. The room changed by an inch again. Enough. I stood there, hands on the frame, and let the steadiness have its sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's final chord, my own breath, unhurried. I didn't belong to anyone, which is another way of saying I belonged fully here. On Monday morning, the air had that clean, emptied-out feel a city gets after a night of quiet rain. I brewed coffee and stood at the window long enough to watch the bus brake lights wink in sequence down the block, a red Morse code that always reads, "Keep going." My phone lay face down on the table. The job offer from Marcus crouched inside it like a small animal deciding whether to step into the light. At 9:12, the screen lit. "I asked for more," the text said. I was polite. I was specific. I didn't apologize for wanting what the work is worth. A minute later, they said yes to half now, the rest after 3 months if I deliver. It feels adult. I smiled into my mug. "That's not half a win," I typed back. "That's a contract with yourself." He sent a photo of his signature, ink sure, hand steady, and the coffee ring that had blessed the page the night before. Then a sandwich with too much arugula and exactly enough satisfaction. I spent the late morning at the community center, the steady hum of fluorescent lights and possibility turning my pulse into a metronome. In the studio, the woman in the postal visor was halfway through a pear that looked like a comet. "It's ugly," she said, bracing for my rescue. "It's honest," I said. She considered that, nodded once, and made the shadow sharper. Caroline drifted past, catching my eye with a conspirator's smile. On her way out, she touched my elbow. "There's talk of a tiny grant," she murmured. "Supplies for seniors who can't afford them. I wrote your name next to mentor. Hope that's okay." The word landed like a folded blanket over my shoulders. "It's more than okay," I said, and meant it. Afternoon brought a knock on my door I didn't recognize, not frantic, not selling anything. When I opened it, Bria stood there with a canvas tote and the expression of someone who'd practiced this moment on the walkover. "I won't come in," she said quickly, as if sparing us both. "I just wanted to return this." She held out a mug I'd once sent soup in, one of Rob's favorites, blue inside, white outside. I found it in a box marked "Kitchen, should keep." It felt like it was telling the truth and a lie at the same time. I took the mug. It was clean and warm from her hands. "Thank you," I said, and left the door open the width of a book. She glanced past me into the small square of my life. It was a polite glance, not a measure. "You look good here," she said, and I believed she meant it. "Personal finance class is going well?" I asked. She rolled her eyes at herself. "Every time I write a budget, I feel 12. But I'm starting to like 12-year-old me. She wants a library card and a bike that doesn't squeak." We laughed quietly at the surprise of it. "I'm proud of you," I said, and watched the compliment land in a place that wasn't hungry anymore. She nodded once. "I'm learning to be proud of me, too." She stepped back. "Okay, that's all." She lifted her hand in a small wave. I lifted mine back. The door closed softly, the sound of a boundary intact and kind. That evening I walked to the corner store for lemons and the kind of milk that makes tea taste like a decision. On the way, a chalkboard outside the cafe announced Open Mic Thursday. Stories welcome in a cheerful scrawl. I snapped a photo and sent it to Ruth. "You're up," I wrote. She responded with 4 exclamation points and a gif of a person tripping theatrically, meaning yes. Thursday arrived, and so did we. Ruth with a comic monologue about losing her car in a grocery store parking lot twice in the same hour. Me with a folded sheet of paper I didn't need to unfold. The cafe was half full of the usual suspects, students in hoodies, a retiree knitting like applause, a barista whose latte rosettas could make you believe in botany. When it was my turn, I stood near the espresso machine and told a short piece I'd titled, "Keys Turn Both Ways." I kept it simple, like a good chord progression. Door, key, hand, turn, click. People laughed in the right places, sighed in the quiet ones, and when I sat down, a man in paint-splattered overalls leaned over and said, "My mother needed that. I needed that more." I nodded, because sometimes agreement is the most accurate prayer. The grant came through. 1 page, 6 lines, a number not large enough to change a city, and exactly big enough to change a Tuesday. We ordered brushes that didn't shed, paper that didn't buckle, colors with names that felt like permission. Alizarin crimson, ultramarine, Naples yellow light. I made labels for the bins in my straightest handwriting, then ruined one on purpose so nobody would be afraid to smudge. In the first session after the supplies arrived, a man who'd only ever drawn houses as squares with triangles on top drew a porch with a sagging step and a cat asleep in the shade. "It looks like the place I grew up," he said, surprised by his own admission. That place kept you, I said. Now you're keeping it. Marcus's new job started on a Monday that smelled like pencil shavings. At lunch, he sent me a picture of his ID badge clipped to a shirt that had obviously met an iron. I'm the oldest on my team, he wrote. It's disorienting and useful. I can hear myself in the interns when they try to skip steps. I sent back, teach them that thinking isn't promising, and he replied with a thumbs up and a photo of a sandwich blessed with humility. In quiet hours, I worked on a new canvas. Not a triptych this time. A single large field divided by a horizon that refused to be straight, a gentle, stubborn line that admitted the earth is round and our eyes are liars. I let the sky have room. I let the ground keep its weight. Near the center, I placed a small, almost invisible door, just a suggestion, a darker rectangle in the light. If you stood far back, you wouldn't see it. If you came close, you would. It felt like honesty, available on approach. One afternoon, the library sent an email. Your talk has passed 1,000 views on the community site. They attached 5 messages they thought I should see. A widow in her 70s who bought a plane ticket to visit a friend she'd put off for a decade. A man who canceled a family group chat for a week to see what silence felt like on purpose. 2 sisters who started a weekly coffee where the rule is, you can't fix me today. Kayla, who said, I've stopped being the bouncer at my own heart. I'm learning to be the host. I printed the messages and slid them under the Words tab, which has begun to look like a slim Bible I didn't know I was writing. Aunt Lillian called on a Saturday with the satisfied breath of someone who has sorted their Tupperware. The ladies' circle watched your video, she announced. Half of them want you to come talk. The other half think you're too bold. Both halves brought lemon bars. I laughed. Tell them I accept payment in lemon bars and dissent. She cackled, then softened. You are making something out of what tried to make you small, she said. That's holy work, whether you mean it to be or not. I'll settle for honest, I said. God can have the adjectives. That night, I set the new canvas on the easel and stepped back. The crooked horizon hummed. The almost door waited like a question that doesn't bully you for an answer. I picked up the smallest brush I own and drew a fine seam of yellow from the top edge to just above the horizon line, light dropping like a thread through fabric. It wasn't a sunrise. It wasn't a warning. It was a path you only see when you're already walking it. The message from Marcus arrived late, the kind of hour when only bars and babies are awake. Saw Bria at the center, he wrote. We nodded. No speeches. A minute later, thank you for not saving me. Turns out it's good to have done some of it myself. I sat with that, the way you sit with a chord that resolves more quietly than you expected and more completely than you knew you wanted. You did it, I wrote back. Keep doing it. When I turned off the lights, the apartment did its usual magic trick, refusing to be dark. The street glow laid its pale ribbon from the door to the chair. I followed it, bare feet sure, and sat down. The plant on the sill had found the hook and made it a home. The refrigerator hummed. The building breathed. Somewhere above, the neighbor's piano tried a new song and got it wrong in the right way. I closed my eyes and listened to the steadiness have its sound. Brush in water, key in lock, breath in chest. A woman named Eleanor Hart, late blooming and right on time. We ate standing at the counter like thieves in our own kitchen. I'm proud of you, he said, unprompted, the sentence plain as tap water. For the booth? I joked, to spare us both. For the whole thing, he said. For drawing a map and then walking it. I held his eyes long enough to mark it down in my light log without reaching for a pen. I'm proud of you for cleaning behind the fridge, I said. He grinned. I found a marble, he said. From when I was 6. Keep it, I said. Proof that you've always been a person worth returning to. After he left, no ask, no angle, I washed 2 plates and a fork and listened to the building settle. The frame on the wall still held the white page with my pencil line. Guiding begins by standing still. I took it down, slid in a print I'd made of the messy middle painting for the woman in the blazer, just to see how it felt to frame what is not simple. The room changed shape by an inch. Sometimes that's all it takes. The next morning, Caroline called. A local library wants a storyteller for their seniors' hour, she said. They asked for someone who knows about beginnings that arrive late. I gave them your number. I laughed. I'm not a storyteller, I said, looking around at 3 canvases that argued otherwise. You've been telling a story for a year, she said. You just happen to paint it sometimes. I checked my calendar, which is a fancy way of saying I looked at a post-it on the fridge. I'll go, I said, and my knees buzzed with the exact voltage of excitement and terror. The library smelled the way a wise room should, paper and hope. 10 seniors, 3 canes, 1 floral walker with tennis balls. I didn't bring the binder. I brought the little camera, set it on the shelf, and spoke the way I do to the lens. Plain, steady, cinematic only in the sense that I let the scene breathe. A year ago, I learned that no is a key. When you turn it, doors open on your side. Heads nodded. One woman raised her hand and said, "What if they stop loving you?" I thought of Bria's letters, of Kayla's scolding, of my own loneliness with a different last name. Then you love you, I said, until the rest catches up, or doesn't. A man in a veteran's cap cried without noise. I let him. Truth plus time equals change, I said, and wrote it on the whiteboard like a grocery item. Afterward, a librarian with a constellation of freckles asked if I'd sign a form so they could share the recording on the community page. Your voice carries, she said, not meaning decibels. I signed. I walked out into a late afternoon that wore its light like a well-tailored suit. At the bus stop, my phone vibrated. A text from a number I hadn't saved. Bria. Saw your talk, it read. I'm starting over too, thank you. I typed, erased, typed again. Good, I wrote back. Start where the light falls. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. We left it there. Space can be respectful when it's not just empty. When I got home, I unlocked the door and stood in that square of street glow that always finds my rug. I set down my keys the way a person does who trusts her own table. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I danced, alone, ridiculous, to a song I didn't pretend was better than it was. The pothouse shook a little in the draft, approving. The paint dried. Somewhere upstairs, the neighbor nailed the hard bar and kept going. I laughed out loud, not because anything was perfect, but because almost everything was finally mine to forgive. Mine to refuse. Mine to love. The morning after the library talk, I woke to a voicemail from a number with more zeros than felt friendly. Miss Hart, a woman said in the kind of crisp that straightens your posture, I'm with the Midtown Arts and Stories Council. The library sent us your recording. We're curating a small series, people telling late-blooming beginnings. Would you consider speaking? There's a modest honorarium. She said the last words like a bridge being lowered. I replayed the message twice, then brewed coffee like it was a strategy. Honorarium. I'd spent a lifetime paying to keep the peace. The idea of being paid to tell the truth landed soft and then rang. Ruth found me pacing between the table and the window with my mug. Say yes, she said before I offered objections. You've been rehearsing for a year. I laughed. I've been painting and not apologizing. Talking is new. She waved a hand. Talking is just painting with air. I called back and said yes in a voice that finally sounded like mine. They booked me for a Saturday afternoon, 15 minutes sandwiched between a retired bus driver who became a poet and a nurse who built a jazz trio after her night shifts. I liked the sound of my neighbors on that program. People who knew the price of a day and chose to spend a little of it on beauty. That week, deliveries arrived like small confirmations. A stack of prints of the messy middle painting for the woman in the blazer. A set of cheap frames. A box of plain postcards with my name and a line Ruth made me choose as a tag. Start where the light falls. I practiced my talk in the kitchen because the acoustics forgive you there. I stood behind the counter, hands on the laminate like a lectern that had known spills and still held steady, and timed myself with the little camera blinking red. The cat's eye clock on the wall Ruth insisted I buy wagged its tail approval. I didn't rewrite every sentence. I trusted the ones that had arrived unannounced and stayed. On Thursday, the phone rang with the specific urgency of a call you don't want to miss. Marcus. I'm okay, he said immediately, which is what you say when you aren't sure yet. I got laid off. The words dropped like a wrench. They did cuts. I didn't make the cut. He inhaled like a person who doesn't want to let a sob out of its cage. Say the thing, he added, almost joking. The thing you said you'd say. I put my palm flat on the counter and felt the cool through the wood. I'm listening, I said, and getting up is your job. Silence, then a ragged exhale that held both insult and relief. I knew you'd say it, he murmured. That's why I called you first and not last. We didn't solve anything on that call. We didn't try. He told me how he'd already circled job listings and texted 2 former bosses. He told me he'd canceled a streaming service, kept the therapy appointment, and eaten the last of the chili he'd frozen for a day like this. He didn't ask for money. I didn't offer it. Proud of you, I said, and meant the boring part, doing the next right thing while your hands still shake. Text me a sandwich when you're fed, I added. The laugh that came back held human weight. Deal, he said. That night, the upstairs neighbor nailed the hard bar of the piano piece and kept going. I clapped, alone, and grinned at my ceiling like a reasonable lunatic. Practice was a neighborhood habit now. We were all in it. The Midtown event took place in a repurposed carriage house with brick walls that remembered horses and didn't insist on it. The audience was a patchwork, retirees in soft cardigans, 2 teenagers in oversized hoodies, a handful of people my age who'd stopped coloring their hair when the math stopped working. The bus driver read a poem about routes that don't end where they promise to, and everyone laughed like they'd shared a transfer. The nurses' trio made the floorboards hum. One elderly man closed his eyes and tapped his cane in time. When it was my turn, I stood where the light found me and told the truth the way I've learned to paint it. No romance about the darkness, no apology for the color. I didn't get brave all at once, I said. I got tired of the old map. I found a key labeled no and turned it. The door opened on my side. I told them about the binder and the class and my son's first apology without a receipt. I told them that forgiveness and boundaries share a kitchen. They just cook different meals. When I finished, the applause was the warm kind, hands making weather because they can. Afterward, a woman in a denim jacket cornered me near the stack of folding chairs. I'm Bria, she said. Not my Bria. Another one, hair clipped back, cheeks flush with the consequences of starting over. I'm moving into a studio this week, she said. My mother says I'm being dramatic. I think I'm being specific. I laughed in a way that recognized her. Specific is how you stop drowning, I said. She nodded like she was memorizing that. Start where the light falls, I added, half a joke, pointing at the postcard in her hand. She squinted at it, then smiled slow. All right, she said. I will. On the bus home, my phone buzzed. A photograph of a perfect, lopsided breakfast sandwich, egg bleeding a little into cheese, sat in my messages like a medal pinned to a cheap jacket. Fed, Marcus wrote. Interview Tuesday. I sent back the gold star, then typed, proud of you for cleaning behind the fridge. He replied with a marble emoji and a broom. We've learned a language that looks silly on paper and keeps us alive. 2 days later, I walked into the community center for my volunteer shift and stopped short. Bria, my Bria, sat in a folding chair in the hallway, a manila folder on her lap like a shield. She looked different. Not thinner, not glamored, just less arranged. Mrs. Hart, she said, standing reflexively. Eleanor, I corrected gently. We regarded one another in the fluorescent truce of institutional lighting. Personal finance at 10, she said, tapping the closed door. I'm early. Me too, I said, holding up my tote like proof I had somewhere to be. We stood in a quiet that wasn't hostile or friendly, just new. I mailed you the divorce papers, she blurted, then flushed. I didn't mean, I only meant you might hear it from me instead of a rumor. I nodded. I'm sorry for what didn't work, I said, and I'm glad for what might later. She glanced down at the folder, then back up. I kept trying to build a life out of urgency, she said. I'm learning to use a calendar. We both smiled because survival sounds funny when it's honest. The class door opened. The instructor waved. You coming? Bria asked. Different room, I said, pointing toward the paintbrush sign with an arrow. Good, she said, surprising us both. It suits you. In the studio, a new woman in a postal service visor held her pencil like it might explode. I can't draw, she announced to the room. I fail at drawing. Good news, I said, sliding a chair beside her. We're not here to draw, we're here to make marks and then decide which ones we like. She blinked, then tried a line. It wobbled. We both smiled like we'd just met a friend who can't park straight yet. On Wednesday, I met with the woman in the blazer to hand over her print. She chose a seat by a window and placed the wrapped frame on the table like it might swim away. I filed the last paper, she said, matter of fact, like a person ordering toast. I thought I'd feel like a house with no furniture. Turns out I feel like a sidewalk after rain. I could see it. The clean, the way everything ordinary shines when it's finally allowed to be ordinary. Start where the light falls, she murmured, reading the small line on my card as if it had been there the whole time and only just now appeared. That evening, the building smelled faintly of someone's soup. I opened my door and found a padded envelope on the mat. Inside, a flyer from the library with a link to my talk and a note in tight, tidy print. I watched, it read. I cried. I signed a lease. Thank you. Kayla. For a second, my breath misfired, the way a car does when you've flooded it. I sat at the table, the one where I had first set my phone down and told it the truth without flinching, and read the note again. Not because I needed proof, but because sometimes the echo is worth hearing. On Friday, the sky performed a full-on apology for a week of gray. I took my canvas to the park and painted without judgment. Just the vague outline of buildings and the specific perfection of a pigeon with one toe missing, who still strutted like a king. The woman who feeds them arrived with her brown bag and her sermons. I told them no again, she reported cheerfully. They survived. I saluted her with my brush. So did you, I said. We sat until the light moved on, the way light is allowed to. The next morning Marcus called after his interview. I didn't lie, he said, breathless with the novelty. I didn't make myself bigger or smaller. I told the truth like it was a competence. I closed my eyes and pictured him at a conference table, hands open, not clenched. That's a skill, I said. One they don't teach in school. He laughed. Offer came in low, he admitted. I told them I'd think and let them know by Monday. I could hear an old version of him in the background, the one who would have agreed immediately to anything that looked like approval. Thinking isn't promising, I said, smiling. You taught me that, he said. Sunday night, I set up the small camera on the table again. The red light glowed like a calm heartbeat. I spoke to the lens without performing for it. You don't have to blow up your life to claim it, I said. Sometimes the revolution is an inch at a time. A no, a door, a chair with your name on it. A sandwich you made and ate and took a picture of because you're the kind of person who is finally proud of feeding yourself. I ended with the line that still makes me laugh. Keys turn both ways, I said. No one charges extra for a second try. When I turned off the camera, the apartment held a gentle hush, the kind rooms make when they approve of what just happened in them. The street glow drew its familiar path across my rug. I stepped into it with bare feet and followed it to the chair I've come to think of as the place where my voice lives. Somewhere above me, the neighbor landed the piano piece again and added a flourish just because he could. My phone buzzed. A photo from Marcus, a job offer letter on a table, a pen, a coffee ring half overlapping the signature line like a blessing and a warning. Thinking, he wrote. I typed, start where the light falls, and then set the phone down face first. The plant on the sill, the one Rob rescued off a clearance rack a lifetime ago, had sent a new vine out overnight and was reaching for a hook I hadn't realized I'd installed. I laughed. Sometimes the future makes plans with you while you sleep. I got up, took the empty $5 frame off the wall, slid out the paper with its penciled sentence, and set the messy middle print inside, this time for me. The room changed by an inch again. Enough. I stood there, hands on the frame, and let the steadiness have its sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's final chord, my own breath, unhurried. I didn't belong to anyone, which is another way of saying I belonged, fully here. The morning after the library talk, I woke to a voicemail from a number with more zeros than felt friendly. Miss Hart, a woman said in the kind of crisp that straightens your posture. I'm with the Midtown Arts and Stories Council. The library sent us your recording. We're curating a small series, people telling late-blooming beginnings. Would you consider speaking? There's a modest honorarium. She said the last words like a bridge being lowered. I replayed the message twice, then brewed coffee like it was a strategy. Honorarium. I'd spent a lifetime paying to keep the peace. The idea of being paid to tell the truth landed soft and then rang. Ruth found me pacing between the table and the window with my mug. Say yes, she said before I offered objections. You've been rehearsing for a year. I laughed. I've been painting and not apologizing. Talking is new. She waved a hand. Talking is just painting with air. I called back and said yes in a voice that finally sounded like mine. They booked me for a Saturday afternoon, 15 minutes sandwiched between a retired bus driver who became a poet and a nurse who built a jazz trio after her night shifts. I liked the sound of my neighbors on that program. People who knew the price of a day and chose to spend a little of it on beauty. That week, deliveries arrived like small confirmations, a stack of prints of the messy middle painting for the woman in the blazer, a set of cheap frames, a box of plain postcards with my name, and a line Ruth made me choose as a tag. Start where the light falls. I practiced my talk in the kitchen because the acoustics forgive you there. I stood behind the counter, hands on the laminate like a lectern that had known spills and still held steady, and timed myself with the little camera blinking red. The cat's eye clock on the wall, Ruth insisted I buy, wagged its tail approval. I didn't rewrite every sentence. I trusted the ones that had arrived unannounced and stayed. On Thursday, the phone rang with the specific urgency of a call you don't want to miss. Marcus. I'm okay, he said immediately, which is what you say when you aren't sure yet. I got laid off. The words dropped like a wrench. They did cuts. I didn't make the cut. He inhaled like a person who doesn't want to let a sob out of its cage. Say the thing, he added, almost joking. The thing you said you'd say. I put my palm flat on the counter and felt the cool through the wood. I'm listening, I said, and getting up is your job. Silence, then a ragged exhale that held both insult and relief. I knew you'd say it, he murmured. That's why I called you first and not last. We didn't solve anything on that call. We didn't try. He told me how he'd already circled job listings and texted 2 former bosses. He told me he'd canceled a streaming service, kept the therapy appointment, and eaten the last of the chili he'd frozen for a day like this. He didn't ask for money. I didn't offer it. Proud of you, I said, and meant the boring part, doing the next right thing while your hands still shake. Text me a sandwich when you're fed, I added. The laugh that came back held human weight. Deal, he said. That night, the upstairs neighbor nailed the hard bar of the piano piece and kept going. I clapped, alone, and grinned at my ceiling like a reasonable lunatic. Practice was a neighborhood habit now. We were all in it. The Midtown event took place in a repurposed carriage house with brick walls that remembered horses and didn't insist on it. The audience was a patchwork. Retirees in soft cardigans, 2 teenagers in oversized hoodies, a handful of people my age who'd stopped coloring their hair when the math stopped working. The bus driver read a poem about roots that don't end where they promised to, and everyone laughed like they'd shared a transfer. The nurses' trio made the floorboards hum. One elderly man closed his eyes and tapped his cane in time. When it was my turn, I stood where the light found me and told the truth the way I've learned to paint it. No romance about the darkness, no apology for the color. I didn't get brave all at once, I said. I got tired of the old map. I found a key labeled no and turned it. The door opened on my side. I told them about the binder and the class and my son's first apology without a receipt. I told them that forgiveness and boundaries share a kitchen. They just cook different meals. When I finished, the applause was the warm kind. Hands making weather because they can. One morning a text came from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Hart, it's Maya. We moved in. The morning light in the living room, just like you said. A photo followed. Gold laid out on wood floors. I stopped at the sink, hand mid-motion, and felt my throat warm like I'd swallowed tea. The old place, my old chapter, was still alive, but it no longer weighed on me. It had pushed off from the dock and found its water. That afternoon, I trimmed the stems on the wildflowers Marcus brought and changed the water. The chipped porcelain vase spotted the sunlight, something once dropped and mended, now doing its job without fuss. I realized I prefer imperfect things. Only objects that have been knocked around seem to know how to stand still without arrogance. Ruth texted, "Farmer's market this weekend?" We wandered past baby corn, beefsteak tomatoes, homemade cheese. At a thrift stall I found a wooden frame polished smooth where hands had passed too often. $5. I bought it, not sure what to hang. You don't have to know, Ruth said. Some frames you buy first, then the picture finds you. One day Marcus hesitated, then wrote, "Visiting Dad's grave this week. Want to come?" We chose Saturday morning after a night's rain. Grass still jeweled with drops. Rob's granite was cool under my palm. Marcus set down a bunch of daisies and stood for a long while. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, barely louder than dry leaves. "I thought being grown meant needing no one. Turns out it means knowing where gratitude belongs." I told Rob about the painting class, about Ruth, about evenings I no longer spent counting the second hand. As we left, Marcus asked, "Tell me how you two met." I smiled. "He borrowed my lighter at the fall fair and never returned it. I'm still convinced that was the plan." We walked and retold old stories until they felt new. No one mentioned money. We left it behind like a shadow that couldn't keep up. Bria sent another letter, shorter, the handwriting less stiff. "I'm taking a personal finance class at the community center. Turns out what I called a plan was just wanting someone else to pay the bill. I'm ashamed, but relieved." I slid the letter under the words tab in my binder beside a scrap I'd copied from somewhere. Truth plus time equals change. Not to clutch, just to remember that forgiveness can be orderly work. Open the drawer, square the papers, close it again. In class, Miss Caroline started us on self-portraits. No mirrors, just memory and the feel of your own face from within. "Don't count the wrinkles," she said. "Count where light chooses." I touched pale yellow to the cheekbone, dragged a thin white line at the eye's corner. I heard her voice from day one. "No mistakes here. Only choices we don't understand yet." If I'd kept that sentence tacked to my door all those years, maybe I wouldn't have needed so long to learn that saying no is the quickest road to a truer yes. Yes to a self, yes to quiet. Ruth came for dinner. We sautéed asparagus with garlic and poured white wine. I told her about the cemetery. She nodded. People think reconciliation is shaking the opponent's hand. Sometimes it's laying a hand on a headstone and saying, "I'm living on now." I asked about her husband. She spoke of long years where love was shredded by bills, night shifts, half-finished meals. "He left like old wind," she said, "and I had to learn to close the window." We clinked glasses. I thought of windows opened at the right time and closed in time. Late, Marcus sent a photo of a cramped, clean kitchen in an old complex. "Crash landing here for now. Tight but enough." I tapped like, then sent a picture of the pothouse on my sill. "You kept that alive all these years?" he asked. "Your dad grabbed it off a clearance rack," I wrote back. "Change the water. It'll crawl through the dim corners." He typed 3 dots, then stopped. It was enough. Some stories should end before they try to be smarter than the feeling. On a Sunday afternoon, the church at the corner rang long. I went to the park and found the bench where the woman feeds bread to pigeons. She waved. "Hey there, brave one," she called me by the name she made up. "I told my son no last week. He's mad, but he's not starving me with silence anymore." We watched sunlight creep over the building's face like a quiet cat. "I used to fear being alone," she said. "Now I fear being erased while sitting in a crowd." I held her thin hand, warm as a sun-soaked stone. "We are here," I said. "That's enough to start." Miss Caroline pinned a new flyer to the corkboard. "Volunteer aids. Help newcomers." She pulled me aside. "Ellie, your hand is steady in the way beginners need. Stay after, walk the room, say no mistakes for me." I blinked. Me, the woman who'd carried coffee trays to keep the peace, asked to carry a lamp. "Yes," I said, and felt some string tied to my chest snap and fall. That night, I hung the $5 frame on my kitchen wall and placed a clean sheet inside, penciling one line. "Guiding begins by standing still." The frame had no picture yet, but it had an invitation. As summer thinned toward fall, Marcus called less often but longer. Each time there was a right-sized silence, space to test whether we were speaking to connect or to control. One night he asked, "Mom, if I slip again, what will you do?" I answered without thinking, "I'll listen, and I'll remind you that getting up is your job." He exhaled. "That's what I hoped you'd say." I didn't know if he sat in the dark or under kitchen light. I only knew the reply had arrived ahead of the question, as if I'd practiced it for years in quiet. I started a light log. Each day I noted one moment where light landed right, on a cup rim, a knuckle, a leaf tip. Nothing grand. Forgiveness is like that, no trumpet announcing its arrival. Just an afternoon when the voice in your head stops pronouncing sentence. I wrote, "Today, 4:17 p.m., light on the canvas edge like someone set down a gold coin and didn't take it back." Ruth and I planned another small trip, not to run from anything but toward what we'd found. A just enough rhythm. On the train home, we listed what we weren't bringing back. Guilt, the habit of over-explaining, the reflex of leaving the phone on in case someone else wanted custody of our evening. I no longer felt the urge to teach anyone to understand me. My job now was to paint where the light truly fell. The 1-year mark arrived like any other day. I brewed coffee, changed the plant's water, glanced at news, and shut it because nothing there outranked a pen. I opened my black notebook and wrote, "A year ago I flipped the switch from wait to go. Today, I don't need the switch." I took down the messy middle painting, added a thin seam of yellow, like a small handwritten line crossing a wide page, then signed, Eleanor Hart. The stroke didn't tremble, not because fear had vanished, but because my hand now knew fear is part of the ink's weight. That afternoon, the phone buzzed, a sky scandalously pink over a supermarket lot. Marcus wrote, "Looks like your third painting." I typed back, "Doesn't need a frame to be art." He sent a heart and then nothing else, respect in pajamas. I put the phone face down, turned on the lamp, and stood in the square of light it spilled on the rug. Sometimes peace arrives as a quiet room. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence you finally own. Tonight it arrived as both. I set a small camera on the table and practiced reading a few lines for a new video, a voiceover for someone sitting somewhere who needed a sentence that was firm and kind. I softened my voice. If you're holding the key and hesitating to turn it, try turning it gently. Doors aren't always as stuck as we think, and even if they are, nobody charges you for a second try. I smiled at the line, silly and decent. Outside, someone closed a door very softly. I knew that sound. It wasn't an ending. It was a boundary, intact and working. When I turned off the lights, the apartment didn't go dark. Street glow poured through the curtain and lay across the rug, drawing a small road from the door to the chair. I knew that if I woke at midnight, I could set my foot in that stripe of light, take a few steps, and sit exactly where I belong. A 65-year-old woman named Ellie Hart, belonging to no one, and therefore, for the first time in many years, belonging entirely to herself. The first time I stayed after class as a volunteer, I learned that steadiness has a sound. It's brushes clinking in a jar and chairs sliding 3 inches so knees don't bump. It's the quiet you give a stranger who is trying to paint a circle and ends up with a brave potato instead. "No mistakes," I heard myself say, Caroline's words wearing my voice, and a woman with a postal service visor blinked hard, like the sentence had knocked some dust off a shelf inside her. I moved from table to table, not correcting so much as witnessing. You'd be amazed how many of us only needed someone to say, "I see it," to keep going. After class, Caroline rinsed palettes at the deep sink and said over her shoulder, "You're good at this, Ellie." Water hissed. She didn't look back to see if I'd argue. "You're not trying to rescue anybody, you just keep the door open." I leaned against the counter, the metal cool through my sleeve. "I was a doormat for a long time," I said. "Maybe I finally learned the difference between open and walked on." She smiled into the basin. "There it is," she said. "Put that in a painting." On Thursday, I took the bus home behind a kid who kept turning to show his grandmother every cloud he thought looked like something. "A dragon," he said. "No, a goose." The grandmother laughed through her nose. "It's just sky," she said, but there was kindness in the just. I texted the sky to Marcus anyway, a cotton-stuffed horizon over the strip mall. He answered with a photograph of a grilled cheese he'd clearly over-buttered. "Progress?" he wrote. "Not burnt." I sent back a gold star without comment. The new dance is mostly that, small notes that don't ask to be cashed. Maya knocked one evening with a pie she admitted she hadn't baked. "Store bakery," she confessed, cheeks pink. "But I brought forks." We ate at my little table like college roommates. Plates unnecessary, laughter easy. She told me the garbage disposal had swallowed a spoon, but Jason fished it out with a magnet from a promo calendar. "This place already feels like ours," she said, and I didn't flinch. I told her how Rob once fixed a leaky faucet with string and a prayer. When she left, I washed the pie plate and put it on the rack upside down. It gleamed with a borrowed kind of gratitude. Sunday brought the kind of rain that makes a city sound honest. I brewed coffee and sorted the drawer where rubber bands go to tangle and batteries go to die. At the bottom, I found a postcard Rob had bought at the fall fair the day we met. A woman smoking in black and white, the smoke curling like a question mark. He'd scrawled on the back, "Keeping your lighter forever, you'll have to come find me." I held the card until the ink felt warm. Grief isn't a one-time ticket, it's a commuter pass. But the route changes. You don't always end up at the old station. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Aunt Lillian, who has a pastor's gift for timing even when she isn't trying to bless anyone. "You on your way to service?" she asked, words wrapped in that Sunday hush. "My service starts at 2, I said, glancing at the clock. "With paint?" She chuckled. "The Lord appreciates a good color story," she said. "You and me both." Then softer, "How's the boy?" I looked at the drying canvas, at the line of yellow I'd learned to trust. "Learning," I said. "Me too." "That's all anyone respectable can do," she answered. "Learning is the only apology with legs." That week, Ruth convinced me to sign up for a booth at the community street fair. Just 3 small canvases, she negotiated, holding up fingers sticky from a donut. "If it rains, we'll blame the weather. If it doesn't, we'll blame our charm." I printed my name on a little card and practiced not apologizing for the price. The morning of the fair smelled like kettle corn and damp grass. Kids with balloon animals wobbled through the crowd, everyone sticky and pleased. My hands shook setting the canvases on their mini easels, before, middle, after. But by the time the 4th person said, "My sister is going through something," the shakes had settled into a piano tremolo I could live with. Strangers brought me their stories in little paper cups. I didn't drink them. I held them until the heat cooled, then passed them back. "You'll know," I kept saying, which is the truest thing I can offer anyone about any door. Midday, a woman in a blazer that advertised competence stopped and tilted her head at the messy middle painting. "It looks like my divorce," she said flatly, then surprised herself by crying. I handed her a napkin and not a solution. "It looks like my life, too," I said, but the argument turned into a chorus once I stopped trying to conduct it. She laughed through her tears in that wet, embarrassed way big-feeling people do in public. "Do you sell prints?" she asked. I didn't, but I heard myself say, "I can." We wrote our names on a receipt that wasn't for money yet, just for intent. When the fair thinned and the shade moved, Marcus appeared like a late addition to the afternoon. He stood on the other side of the table, with his hands in his pockets, an old habit that used to mean he was about to ask me to cover rent and now meant he didn't know where to put his hands. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I echoed. He looked at the little card with my name on it like it belonged to an author of something he wanted to finish. "Look at you," he said, half tease, half awe. "A booth." "Look at me," I agreed, and we both smiled like we hadn't rehearsed it. He bought me lemonade and didn't try to negotiate the price down like he used to at yard sales. Half for the toaster because it only browns on one side. We sat on a curb, eating kettle corn and watching a teenager badly juggle 3 apples. "Therapy's hard," he said abruptly, as if he'd been holding the sentence like a hot pan. "It's like cleaning behind the fridge. You find stuff you can't believe you lived with." He glanced at me, gauging weather. I told him about the recordings. My spine remembered being a fence. What did he say? He said you protected yourself. He asked me why it scared me that you finally did. He laughed once, small and true. I didn't have an answer I liked. I nudged his sneaker with mine. "I didn't enjoy recording you," I said. I needed to make sure I wasn't inventing a monster that was really me insisting on boundaries for the first time. "I know," he said. "I hate that you needed it. I'm glad you had it." There are truces that don't make a headline. They just sit between 2 people like a small animal and decide to breathe. Late afternoon, a gust of wind lifted one of the canvases and Ruth snatched it mid-air like a shortstop. "Nice hands," Marcus said, approving the play. Ruth tipped an invisible cap. "Years of saving casseroles from hitting the floor," she said. "I'm Ruth." "Marcus," he answered, shaking her hand like a person raised right, which in that moment he was. They talked about baseball and garlic and the proper way to salt pasta water. Arguments that keep people safe. By sunset, the sky performed for cheap, all sherbet and theater. I packed the unsold canvases without flinching, as if abundance could include leftovers. Marcus folded the table like he'd done it 1,000 times. He had scout camping trips, fundraisers, yard sales. For a second, I saw 10-year-old him with chocolate on his face and a loose shoelace flapping, and I didn't want anything from that boy except for him to have water and a seatbelt. "Come over," I said, hearing the surprise in my own voice. "I have leftover asparagus and a pie plate that wants company." He followed me home carrying the frame Ruth had insisted I buy months ago, the empty one that had just been waiting for a picture. That evening, when the phone rang again and the number flashed a warning, an old family friend who has never met a boundary she didn't try to redecorate, I let it go to voicemail. Then I played it, because dignity isn't the same as avoidance. "Ellie, honey," the message began, "just calling to say we're all praying you soften your heart." I looked at the painting glowing above my sofa and smiled. My heart wasn't hard. It was finally the right shape. The gallery smelled like clean walls and nervous hands. Miss Caroline had taped everyone's names on craft paper beneath the small canvases, her handwriting neat and deliberate, the way teachers write when they want you to feel chosen. Ruth hovered by the refreshments, pretending not to fuss. I could tell by the way she smoothed the plastic tablecloth that she was more excited for me than for herself. My 3 pieces hung together, before, during, after, like a triptych that didn't ask permission to tell the truth. People drifted in wearing the hopeful faces you bring to community art. Neighbors, someone's grandkids in soccer uniforms, 2 men from the barbershop down the block, a woman who looked like she made perfect pound cake and refused to share the recipe. I stood off to the side the way shy people do, trying to look like I just happened to be leaning against this wall with my hands folded and my heart loud. "Yours?" a stranger asked, tipping her chin toward the middle canvas, the messy one. The hard chorus of color that never landed on a single note and somehow held together anyway. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like a bead threaded onto something strong. "I like it," she said. "It looks like somebody stopped apologizing." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did what polite women do and said, "Thank you." Then sipped lemonade that tasted like June. Ruth slid in next to me, her shoulder warm against mine. "Breathe, Ellie," she whispered. "You're allowed to breathe at your own party." I made a show of inhaling, then exhaling, and the silly performative breath made both of us giggle the way girls do when they've survived something the room doesn't have the vocabulary for. Miss Caroline clapped her hands once to gather the air. "Welcome, welcome," she said. "No speeches, no judges, no prizes, just proof that showing up makes a mark." Heads nodded. There's a relief in not being ranked. I was mid-nod when the door chimed, and time did the strange thing it does when your past walks in wearing your future's shoes. Marcus stood there, a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand, a look on his face that didn't have an argument attached to it. He'd shaved, not perfectly, but with intention. The raw patch on his jaw looked like honesty. For a beat we stared at each other across the room. Mother, son, a crowd that didn't know we were an old event. Then he raised the flowers half an inch like a child offering a found treasure. "Hey, Mom," he said when he reached me, his voice pitched for ordinary. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't start a sentence with a demand and pretend it was a greeting. "Congratulations." I glanced at Ruth, who lifted her eyebrows just enough to say, "If you need me, I am a medieval shield. If you don't, I am air." "Thank you," I said, and reached for the bouquet. The stems were damp and stubborn in the brown paper sleeve. They smelled like field and trying. He looked up at my paintings like they were exhibits in a case he was finally ready to approach. "This one," he said, pointing to the first canvas, the dark one, "is before." He didn't ask and I didn't correct him. "This one is now," he said, stepping to the third, where the light doesn't apologize for showing up. He stood in front of the middle piece longer than either of us expected, his mouth making that small line he gets when he's doing math without numbers. "And this," he said quietly, "is me, or what I did to you, or maybe what we did to each other." It wasn't eloquent, it didn't have to be. The room rearranged itself around the sentence. "I started therapy," he said, still looking at the paint like it might answer for me. "I should have started years ago. I picked a guy who doesn't let me make jokes to get out of talking. He asked me why I kept saying my condo, and I heard myself, like I was listening to a stranger brag at a bar." He swallowed. "I wasn't raised to take things. I was raised to expect them. There's a difference. and it's uglier. A woman next to us murmured to her friend about the brushwork, and I loved her for not knowing we were operating a heart on the wall. I didn't come to ask you for anything, he said, his eyes finally finding mine. I came to see what you've been making and to tell you I'm sorry. He said the last word like it might shatter if he rushed it. Not the kind of sorry with a receipt attached, the kind that sits down and shuts up and lets you decide what happens next. Inside me, some old wire loosened by a fraction I couldn't measure. I thought of all the times I'd begged for a please or a thank you and gotten a to-do list. I thought of the binder under my bed and the way paper can outlast rage. I'm listening, I said. It was the most I could promise without lying to either of us. He nodded, almost grateful to be limited. I was grieving Dad, and I used you as a mirror I didn't want to look into, he said, surprising me with the kind of sentence you can't invent on the spot. It was easier to be busy and perform adulthood than to sit with the part where I'm scared I won't be anything without what you built. He laughed once, short and broken. Turns out, performing adulthood and doing it are different jobs. He reached for his pocket, then stopped, caught himself before he could hand me a script disguised as a phone. Brian and I, we're taking time, he said. Maybe it's a break, maybe it's an ending. We wanted the same future for different reasons. That's not a marriage, that's a negotiation that never closes. Have you eaten? I asked, because motherhood isn't a switch, it's a house you learn to live in with the lights off when you need to save power. Not really, he admitted, and Ruth materialized like a competent thought. There are cookies, she said to him, not to me, a kindness that kept me from playing waitress at my own reckoning. He smiled at her in a way that said he knew an ally when he met one. Took cookie, then didn't, handing it to a child who'd been eyeing the table like a pirate assessing loot. His apology wasn't perfect. It didn't come with a user manual, but it was his, and it was here, and it didn't have a pitch forked under it. That mattered more than I wanted to admit, in a room where I'd sworn to myself I would admit nothing I hadn't vetted. Can I call you? Sometimes, he asked, and there was the boy again, but not the manipulative one, just the one who'd learned recently that phones ring both ways. No asks, he added quickly, just to tell you about a sandwich I was proud of, or to send a photo of a sky that looks like a painting you'd make. The specifics saved him. The specifics made it human. You can, I said, and felt the shape of the boundary like a good shoe. It fit. It didn't pinch. It wouldn't let me fall. If you ever start asking for what isn't mine to give, the calls stop. No arguments, no speeches, just stop. He nodded. He said, and for once the word didn't sound like a trick. He stayed nearly 2 hours, circulating as if he'd been to 100 openings, listening to women talk about line and color and courage, like any of it could be separated. Miss Caroline, who can read a room the way a conductor reads a score, found her way to us. You must be Marcus, she said, and he looked startled to be known. Your mother has a steady hand, she added. That's not something you can fake. He looked at me with a twist of a smile, and I could see the quick inventory in his head. All the ways I'd steadied a life he thought was spinning on its own. When he left, he hugged me. Not a performance hug. Not the stiff, photo-ready one. A real one, with enough room in it for both our failings. I'm proud of you, he said into my hair, and I believed him, because it cost him something to say it and because he didn't follow it with a request. The door chimed him out, and the room rushed back into focus. The laughter, the paper plates, Ruth's shoulders relaxing like a sail catching wind. After the show, we walked into a night that had the decency to be mild. Ruth looped her arm through mine. You did it, she said. Did what? I asked, too tired to assign verbs. You turned a fight into a room full of witnesses, she said. You let the truth hang on a wall and asked it to behave itself. It did. I snorted. Barely, I said, and we both laughed until we had to stop to breathe. At the corner, a bus sighed to a halt and opened its doors like an invitation you don't need to dress up for. Back at the condo, I set the flowers in a chipped vase I love because it refuses to pretend it's perfect. I took off my shoes and stood in the kitchen in my stocking feet, the way I used to when Rob and I would come home from a dance and eat cereal out of mixing bowls. The phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't saved on purpose. Brea. It was short. I heard he came. I hope it was Useful. There was a period after every sentence, the way people write when they're trying to balance on heels they haven't practiced in. I typed and erased 3 replies, then settled on the only one that didn't overpromise. We talked. I wish you well. I set the phone face down and let the quiet make its case. Days can pass like water, like light across a wall you've just met. I painted small things, lemons that refused to look like lemons, a window that kept coming out too blue, and I didn't scold my hands for trying. Marcus called on a Tuesday and told me about a sandwich too large for its bread. He sent a picture. It was ridiculous. I laughed. He didn't mention money. I didn't reward him like a dog learning a trick. We talked about a podcast he didn't think I'd like, and I did, secretly. When we hung up, I didn't linger by the phone the way women in movies do. I washed my mug. I watered the plant that was thriving because I chose it and because I'd learned the difference between drowning and care. A week later, an envelope slid under my door. No return address. The kind of stationery you buy in a pack because you're going to need several tries. Bria again, but lighter somehow, like a person who finally stopped wearing a coat in a climate that didn't require it. Marcus and I are separating, she wrote. Not because of you, because we built a life out of expectation and called it love. We are both learning the difference. She didn't ask me to pick sides. She didn't accuse me of anything. She said thank you, unadorned. I put the letter with the others under the tab I'd made, words, and felt something I hadn't planned on feeling. Not victory, not sadness. Space. On a Sunday morning so clear it felt like a window had been washed in the sky, I took the middle painting, the messy one, out of its gold thrift frame and set it on the table. With a small brush, I added a single line of yellow across the part that had always felt like it was arguing with itself. It didn't fix anything. It didn't need to. It just told the truth louder in one place. Then I signed my name again, this time not because the piece required it, but because I did. Eleanor Hart, in a hand that looked like it had been practicing its whole life for the day it would stop being afraid of its own pressure. That afternoon, the woman from the park, the one who names pigeons like their parishioners, waved me over to the bench that keeps the last of the sun. Brave woman, she said, as if that were my surname. I told them no, she said without preamble, and her eyes shone with the unsteady pride of a person trying on a new size of self. They didn't like it. Half of them were angry, the other half understood. She shrugged, a perfect little lift of the shoulders. I understood, I said. We watched the light climb a building and then stepped down, one floor at a time, unbothered. I used to think the worst thing was being alone, she said. Now I think the worst thing is being erased while standing in a room full of people. We sat until the pigeons decided their day was over. On the walk home, I thought about keys and locks and how sometimes the bravest thing a door can do is stay closed. When I let myself in, the condo smelled like the lemon I'd sliced earlier and the paint drying on the table. The phone buzzed. It was Marcus, a picture of a sky obscenely pink over a parking lot, the kind of beauty that refuses to audition for a better backdrop. Looks like your third painting, he wrote. Good, I typed back. Take it in, it's free. He sent a heart, the unembarrassed kind, and then nothing else, which felt like respect wearing pajamas. I put the phone face down, turned on the lamp, and stood in the square of light it made on the rug. Sometimes peace arrives like a quiet room. Sometimes it arrives like a sentence you finally own. Tonight it arrived as both. A week after the show, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt like a small apartment learning to breathe. Mornings were sun pouring through the pane. Afternoons were the neighbor upstairs practicing the same piano bar until it finally softened. Nights were the desk lamp warming the half-dry canvas. Marcus called on Tuesdays or Thursdays, no probing, no strings, just small weather reports from his life, a comically overstuffed sandwich, a difficult client, a game where the shot went wide. I listened, asked a few right-sized questions, and ended the calls before we slid back into the old lane of who owes whom. The conversations weren't an invisible noose anymore. They were windows, open just enough to let new air in, closed before a draft. Every so often, the phone would light up with Marcus's name. Have you thought any more about the thing? He'd say, as if we were discussing meatloaf and not my home. Bria texted listings with yards and nurseries, painted the color of organized optimism. She liked to say grandbabies, as if the ghost of a child could co-sign a loan. I sent back still thinking and sounds nice and busy today, and what I meant was, I am occupied with my own survival. I recorded some of the calls, the ones where their voices dipped into the registry you use when you think you're managing someone. On the screen, the file names looked harmless. Inside them lived the part of the story that would keep me safe if I needed it. Proof isn't romantic. It is, however, a kind of love you learn to extend to yourself. The first night in the new condo, I ate takeout pad thai out of the carton at the counter and listened to the neighbor above me walk like a thoughtful person. I opened the window. The city breathed. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then was satisfied. I slept on sheets that smelled like sun from the afternoon I'd line-dried them in the new light. In the morning I made coffee, and it tasted the way coffee tastes when the grinder is right and the water is new. I sat on the sill with my knees up and felt something I almost didn't recognize, relief with no apology folded into it. It didn't stop them from trying. The dinner invitation came like a rare bird. "Our treat," Marcus texted, as if generosity could moonlight as leverage. At the restaurant with the brick walls and the old photographs, they built a case for my safety and their future. For the way close could be, another word for control. They said, family price and advance on inheritance. Two phrases that sound like care until you ask who ends up empty. I said, I'll think about it, because I'd learned that silence makes more noise than arguments do. And anyway, the decision had been made already, signed and wired and boxed and carried, and the deed to my new life had my name on it alone. A few days later, I found myself in a store I hadn't walked into in years. An art supply place that smelled like paper and possibility. The clerk, blue nails, soft voice, helped me choose a cheap set of acrylics and 3 brushes that felt right in my hand. I didn't know why I was buying them yet. I only knew my hands wanted to make a different kind of mess than the one I'd been cleaning up for years. On the way home, I saw a flyer thumbtacked to a corkboard. Beginner painting. No experience, no judgment. Tuesdays and Thursdays afternoons. Miss Caroline Vance. I took the tab with the number like it was a dare I could pass or fail only by not showing up. I called. She said, "Come," the way good teachers do. That's how the days started to turn, quietly, toward me. Lists became checkmarks. Checkmarks became small routines. I learned the bus schedule for a line I'd never ridden because I always made space for other people to sit. I memorized the route to the park with the bench that gets the last of the sun. I bought a plant that was not a rescue but a choice. I saved the recordings, the binder, the statements in a locked drawer, not to clutch like weapons, but to remind myself on weak mornings that courage leaves paper trails. When guilt knocked, I opened the door, looked it in the face, and asked it to show its work. Mostly it couldn't. Mostly it was just the old lesson asking to be taught again, that a mother's worth is measured in what she gives away. I started grading that lesson with a red pen, so when the day came that Marcus decided to drop the invitations and go straight to the demand, when his fist hit the door and his voice filled the empty living room that didn't belong to me anymore, I wasn't surprised by the volume. I was ready for it. Ready for the words that would finally, mercifully, match the truth. Ready to say the sentence that had been practicing in my mouth for weeks. It was never yours. Ready to offer the last gift I owed any of us, the clarity that ends a story and begins a life. Marcus didn't knock this time. His fist struck the wood twice, and the door flew inward on his momentum. The empty room swallowed the sound and threw it back at us. Bria was right behind him, breathless, one hand pressed to her chest like she could hold her heart steady if she kept it still. "You sold my condo? Hand over the money. Now." My son's voice was too loud for a room with no furniture. It bounced off the bare walls and came back thinner, like even the echo didn't believe him. I stayed where I was, beside a stack of boxes I hadn't bothered to label because they were full of air and dust and the last bits of a life I was done carrying. "There's one more thing you need to hear," I said. It wasn't a threat. It was a door I was about to close. He stopped then, because anger always slows down when it meets something it can't move. "What did you do?" he demanded, but the shape of the question had already changed. Bria scanned the room, searching for her future and finding only nail holes and a pale square where a painting used to be. "Ellie," she said, soft, the way you talk to a skittish animal. "We had plans. We told the owner we wanted that house." I nodded like she'd mentioned the weather. "I had plans too," I said. "I sold this condo 3 weeks ago. The transfer cleared. The new owners move in on Monday. I bought a smaller place. I paid in full. The rest is invested for my retirement." I let each sentence land, simple and complete. Paper, ink, wire, key. Things that don't argue. For a second his face did that boyish thing, the flinch he used to make when he fell off his bike and checked to see if I'd seen him cry. Then the heat came back. "You promised me," he said. "You told me." "I told you I'd think," I said, and I could hear my own voice like it belonged to someone who'd learned to keep it. "Thinking isn't promising, and I didn't owe you a promise about something that was never yours." The words made their own weather. The room felt cooler, the light more honest. Bria's mascara had smudged just enough to suggest tragedy. "But a family helps each other," she whispered. "A family takes care of its own." "A family does," I said. "A bank does not, and you've been talking to me like I'm a bank." He came a step closer, and for the first time in a long time I saw the man he might still be, buried under the man he's been practicing. "We have nowhere to go," he said, softer, like he'd found the smaller hammer in the set. "We'll be out on the street." I let the lie sit there, uninvited. Marcus has friends who own guest rooms and pride sturdy enough to borrow couches from, and a paycheck that has lived just fine without my signature for 15 years. "You won't be on the street," I said. "You'll be where adults go when they make a plan that doesn't include stealing someone else's. You'll be exactly where your choices put you." He sucked in a breath. Bria tried again. "Think of your grandbabies," she said, as if a future child could co-sign my fear. "Think of how happy we'd all be together. You could live with us." She smiled, and I could see the hall closet in their imaginary house, the one where they'd store me until visiting hours. I set the binder on the windowsill. It was an ugly thing. Black vinyl with tab dividers I wrote out myself in block letters. Closing, wire, new deed, statements. I opened it and fanned the pages the way a magician proves there's no trick. "I'm not asking you to be happy for me," I said. "I'm telling you how this will be. If you try to contest it, if you show up at my new place, if you suggest to anyone that I'm not of sound mind, you should know I keep records." I tapped the plastic sleeve that held copies of the sale documents. Names, dates, signatures. Then I set my phone beside the binder. And sound. I didn't have to press play. The knowledge that there was a play to press did the work for me. A little color drained out of both their faces. "You recorded us?" Bria breathed, wounded where the performance would show. "I recorded me," I said. "I recorded the truth in the room when the truth didn't think I was listening. I recorded enough to remind myself I wasn't crazy, enough to defend myself if I needed to." Marcus tried a laugh that failed halfway up his throat. "You're paranoid," he said. This is unhinged." I shrugged because sanity doesn't answer to accusation. "Maybe I finally hinged," I said. "Either way, the paperwork doesn't care how you feel about it." For a moment we all listened to the emptiness. You can hear your own life in an empty room. Your breath, your pulse, the exact weight of every decision you didn't make until you had to. He shifted tactics the way people do when the first script bombs. "Mom," he said, and the word landed between us like a chipped plate. "I messed up. I know I did. I haven't been great, but you blindsided us." He spread his hands as if the right gesture could balance the scale. "We were counting on you." "You were counting," I said. "That's different." The calm surprised him more than the sentences. He expected a fight, the old one where I backed down in the third round because I'm tired of the noise. He wasn't ready for a woman who'd slept, eaten, practiced saying no in a mirror until it felt like yes to herself. Bria pivoted to sorrow. "I thought we were family," she whispered, one tear obediently finding the corner of her mouth. "I thought you loved us." "I do," I said, and watched confusion cross her face, because love and refusal rarely shake hands in stories like hers. "I love you enough not to buy you a life you haven't earned. I love myself enough to live the life I did." The truth of it warmed the back of my neck like sunlight through a window. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I didn't fill the silence with the kind of explanations women are taught to carry around like spare change. He moved closer to the binder, as if proximity could blur it. At least give us the cash from the sale, he said, rushing now, hearing the clock that wasn't ticking. We can still get the house, we can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said. There's just what is. I slid the top page of the statements free and held it up until the numbers shone. This is my age insurance, I said. My heat and February money. My no one decides for me fund. It will keep me from being your responsibility, which, judging by the past few years, would not go well for either of us. He flushed, a dark band rising from his collar. That's not fair. It's accurate, I said. Fair is a word people use when accurate hurts. He looked around, finally seeing what I'd been learning to look at for months, the way the room didn't hold a shape that matched him anymore. He turned toward the door, then back, unwilling to leave the stage on a line that didn't belong to him. We'll never forgive you for this, he said, and there was that boy again, cornered, performing for an audience that was out getting popcorn. I can live with that, I said, and found that I could. Bria put a hand on his arm, and for once I couldn't tell whether it was for him or for show. At the threshold she looked back. I hope the money keeps you warm, she said. It will, I said. The love I had to earn alone already does. The door hit the jamb harder than it needed to. The echo had edges. Then it softened and became part of the building, like everything else that happens in a place where people have lives they can't always name out loud. I stood in the center of the empty living room and waited to feel ruined. It didn't come. My legs were shaky with adrenaline, sure. My heart beat like it had important work to do. But under the noise there was a steady hum, a song that sounded a lot like relief. I put the binder back in my tote, slid the phone into my pocket, and walked the room once more. Not to say goodbye, we had already done that, but to take inventory. Window, light, air, key. On the stairs down, I passed a couple coming up, Jason and Maya, the soon-to-be owners, their faces bright with the specific hope of people about to start a story with their names in the first line. We're early, Maya said, apologizing to no one. We just couldn't wait. I smiled because I knew that feeling. You're right on time, I said, stepping aside. Outside, the afternoon had that crisp, mid-Atlantic honesty that makes even the sidewalk look like it belongs to someone who takes care of it. I turned my face to the air and let it do what air does. Fill, lift, clear. On the drive back to the new place, I caught every green light. It wasn't a sign, it was a sequence. The way good choices sometimes line up after you've made the first brave one. In my kitchen, the mug waited where I'd left it, blue inside, white out, a ring on the counter like a halo left behind. I poured tea and sat by the window. A kid on a scooter scraped past, 2 dogs braided their leashes, and their owners laughed. Someone upstairs practiced a piano piece and got the same bar wrong 3 times before nailing it. I breathed, slow and deep, in a home that didn't require me to be anyone else to keep the lights on. Somewhere in the building, a door closed softly, the sound not of an ending, but of a boundary, intact and working. The call came before the kettle cooled, a number I didn't recognize, the kind of string of digits that already knows what it wants. I stared at it until the second ring felt rude, and then answered. Mrs. Hart, this is Kayla, Bria's sister. She said her name like a subpoena. I need to say how disappointed I am. Marcus is. She took a breath and reached for a strong word. Devastated. I watched steam lift off my mug and disappear into the late light. Kayla, I said, you've heard one version. She didn't bother to hide the scoff. I've heard enough. He counted on you. They counted on you. And at your age. There it was, a phrase people use when they want to assign you to the corner of the room where decisions go to die. At my age, I said, I've learned the difference between need and want. Marcus wants a house. He needed to learn that it isn't mine to buy. Silence, then a brittle cluck of the tongue. I hope you can live with yourself, she said, like a curse that forgot its teeth. I can, I said. I finally can. I hung up. The phone felt warm in my hand, like a small animal I'd kept alive through a storm. A day later the call came from a name I knew, Aunt Lillian, who isn't really my aunt but has been family at enough funerals to qualify. Ellie, she started, voice wrapped in Sunday softness. I'm calling as someone who loves you, The boy called me. He said it got ugly. I closed my eyes because the boy is a phrase that makes men feel like they still deserve childhood's mercy. It got honest, I said. Sometimes those things look alike from the outside. She lowered her voice like gossip was a prayer. Family is all we have. Lily, I said gently, family is one of the things we have. Boundaries are another. I finally found some, and I'd like to keep them. She sighed, the kind that says she'd rather be right than relieved. Forgiveness will keep you warm at night, she offered. So will insulation, a pension, and a locked front door, I said, and we both laughed, a little surprised to hear it. I love you, she said at last, and I believed her. Then love me enough to let this stand, I said. We hung up without a winner. That's how grown people end a round. I slept that night the way you do after the first good cry in a year. Not dreamless, just uncomplicated. Morning had the ordinary courage of sunlight on a clean floor. I washed the mug, made the bed, and walked to the bus stop with a tote bag that held nothing fragile. A bottle of water, the cheap acrylics I'd bought on a dare to myself, a notebook for lists that might become something else. The community center was a low brick building with a hand-lettered sign that made up for what it lacked in rent with sincerity. In the room marked AR2B, 6 tables waited like small stages. A woman with hair the color of thoughtful snow stood at the front and smiled in a way that made your shoulders drop an inch. I'm Caroline, she said. If you can hold a brush, you can stay. If you can't hold a brush, we'll set it down and talk instead. The room laughed, the first sound of a choir that didn't know it had voices. We didn't start with horizons or fruit bowls. We started with color like it was language, and we were all immigrants trying to order lunch. Caroline showed us how water listens, how acrylic forgives, how there's never just one red. There are no mistakes here, she said, walking between our tables. Only choices we haven't understood yet. My first stroke was small and timid, a child peeking around a doorway. The next one was a little braver. An hour in, I looked down and realized I'd stopped narrating every move with a criticism. The paint did what it does, refused to be perfect and be beautiful anyway. Across from me, a woman with short curls that bounced like punctuation looked up from her canvas and grinned. "First day?" she asked. "It shows, but in a good way." "Ellie," I said. "Ruth," she returned, and shook my hand like we were making a pact. After class, Ruth asked if I wanted coffee. We walked 3 blocks to a place with cracked tile and a chalkboard menu that didn't change enough to be cute about it. She ordered something with foam. I ordered black out of habit. We sat by a window, 2 women whose lives had been rearranged, tracing the outlines of the new furniture. 40 years married, she said, tapping her ring finger, which was bare but remembered. He's been gone 3. My kids live in other area codes and sometimes other versions of me I can't afford to be anymore. She smiled without apology. I was so bad at being alone, I thought it was a moral failure. I told her about Rob, how he exited like a gentleman, and about Marcus, who wasn't born a villain so much as taught a script he never stopped reading. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't have to. Some stories don't need the footnotes to be true. "You're the bravest person I've met this month," she said finally, which is a ridiculous metric, and exactly the boost I needed. "I just bought myself a life," I said. "Turns out escrow closes on courage, too." We laughed, the kind of laugh that leaves a ring in the air you can sit your teacup on later. The days began to find their shape. Tuesday, Thursday meant pain under my nails and Caroline's voice in my ear. "Wider, Ellie. Trust the line." Mornings meant the park, the bench that kept the last slice of sun, the woman in the camel coat who fed pigeons and called them by names like they were a tiny congregation. I bought a plant that had not needed rescuing. I watered it with the care we reserve for things we chose. I made dinner in a pan that had survived 3 apartments and 1 marriage, and the onions obliged by smelling like every kitchen where I have ever told the truth. Marcus texted, less often and more carefully. Not a single mom with a string attached, just weather talk and a photo of a sandwich he was proud of for no reason. Once he called and said, "I'm looking for therapists who take my insurance." He said it like a confession and not a weapon. "Good," I said. "Call 2. Keep 1. He didn't ask for money. I didn't offer it. This is what distance can do when it's not punishment. It can be air. Then the letter arrived, the kind that's still brave enough to be paper. The return address was familiar in the way a hallway you've walked for years is familiar, even after the furniture's been swapped out. Bria's handwriting is small and tidy, like she's making herself easy to read. "Mama Ellie," it began, and the pen stalled there, the old salutation hitting a new wall. She said the words people reach for when they're trying to exit a story politely. Sorry, understand, respect. She said they'd lost the house. She didn't blame me. She said something I underlined without meaning to. I didn't know the difference between a plan and a demand. I folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in the binder under a new tab I made with a piece of masking tape. Words. Not as leverage, as record. Ruth and I planned a small escape to the coast, the kind you take to prove the horizon isn't a rumor. Savannah, we decided, because neither of us had ever been, and because maps look friendlier when water presses a soft blue against them. We took the bus to the train, and the train to a street that leaned toward live oaks and light. We walked with no intent to arrive, peered into galleries where painters were braver and sloppier than we were, ate shrimp that tasted like the ocean had whispered a secret into the pan. On the beach at Tybee, we rolled our pants to the knee and let the water do what it does. Remind you you're more temporary than you think and more permanent than you fear. Ruth cried a little and blamed the wind. I told her wind is as good a reason as any. Back home, Miss Caroline pinned a flyer on the corkboard. Student show, small works. Only if you want, she said to the room, reading our reluctance like a well-loved book. You don't have to be ready, you only have to be willing. I painted 3 canvases on the table by my window, the sill crowded with cups and brushes and the mug I keep promising to move to the sink. The first was dark, the before, without apology. The second was chaotic, a grid that refused to stay straight, a conversation between colors that interrupted each other and somehow made a chorus. The third was simple and bright like a good morning that doesn't pretend to fix your life but arrives anyway, on time. When I signed my name, Eleanor Hart, in a hand that has learned to own itself, I didn't think of who might see. I thought of Rob's jacket sleeves and Marcus's laugh when he was 4 and the woman at the bank with hair like polished wood. I thought of the door closing softly in an old apartment and the window opening in a new one. Pressure didn't stop just because I hung 3 small declarations on a wall. Kayla sent 2 more texts and a final frosty heart. Aunt Lily called to report on the church committee's opinions as if they were binding law. They think you're strong, she admitted finally, and maybe a little cold. Let them think I'm refrigerated, I said. It keeps the fresh things from spoiling. She cackled, then blessed me the way women who've lived long enough do, without a formal script, with the authority of surviving. On a Wednesday, when the sky couldn't decide between rain and performance, I stopped at a thrift store and found a frame with just enough gold on it to remember the sun. I bought it for $5 cash and put the second painting in it. The messy middle, the one that looks like it's breaking and is actually becoming. I hung it above the small sofa in the new place and sat across from it until dusk balanced itself on the buildings like a cat on a fence. For a long time I thought becoming had an age limit. I was wrong. Becoming is a practice. The brush knows, the line knows, the hand learns finally to press and release.